Low wind sound. The camera fades into dark storm clouds rolling over Philadelphia. A single house sits quietly on a lonely street. Narrator: deep, steady tone. March 1987. Philadelphia. The city slept quietly that night, but inside one house on North Marshall Street, a nightmare was unfolding. His name, Gary Michael Heidnik. To his neighbors, he was just a strange man with thick glasses, always alone, always keeping to himself. But behind his locked doors, Gary was building a world no one could imagine, a dungeon of horror. Soft thunder. Camera zooms slowly toward a basement door. Gary's story begins decades earlier, far from Philadelphia. He was born in 1943 in Eastlake, Ohio. His childhood was anything but normal. His parents divorced when he was young, and his father was known to be strict, sometimes cruel. Gary was intelligent but withdrawn. He rarely made friends and was constantly bullied for his awkward walk and high-pitched voice. When he was a teenager, his classmates gave him a nickname, Mr. Oddball. He didn't talk much. He didn't smile. He just stared and listened. After high school, he joined the U.S. Army hoping to find purpose. But instead he found more isolation. He was hospitalized multiple times for mental breakdowns and eventually discharged with a diagnosis of schizophrenia. Wind fades, replaced by low hum, sound of fluorescent lights and hospital beeps. When he returned to civilian life, Gary started visiting mental institutions, not as a patient but as a visitor. He would talk to women there, women who had no families, no homes, and no one to protect them. He seemed kind at first. He listened. He offered them help. And that's how he began his twisted plan. Soft piano keys, one single note repeating. Despite his strange behavior, Gary was smart, very smart. He started investing small amounts of money in the stock market. Within a few years he became a quiet millionaire. He bought a house in Philadelphia, modest, 2 stories, nothing unusual. But beneath that house he started something horrific. Echoing thud, sound of wood being hammered. He built a pit in his basement. A deep, dark hole, just wide enough for a person to fit inside. He covered it with a wooden board and chained it shut. This pit became his private prison. Narrator voice lowers. It all began in November 1986. Gary met Josefina Rivera, a 25-year-old woman struggling to make ends meet. He offered her a ride, food, and a warm place to stay. But when she stepped inside his house, he hit her, dragged her down to the basement, and chained her to a wall. Sound of chains rattling. Josefina was the first, but she wouldn't be the last. Over the next few months, Gary kidnapped 5 more women. Each one lured in with promises of kindness. Each one ending up in the dark, cold basement. He kept them locked up, naked, starved, and beaten. Sometimes he would force them to fight for food. Other times he used electric wires to shock them if they made noise. He told them he was building a baby factory. A group of women who would have his children and rebuild the human race. In his delusional mind he thought he was creating something divine. But in reality he was destroying lives one by one. Wind howls followed by muffled screams. Heidnik controlled everything, when they ate, when they slept, when they spoke. He even blasted loud music to drown out their cries so no one outside could hear. But his madness only grew. One night, one of the captives, Sandra Lindsay, made too much noise. Gary punished her by hanging her by her wrists for days. When she died he didn't stop. He dismembered her and hid the evidence. Pause. Static hum. When the women realized what he had done, they knew escape might be impossible. But Josefina, the first woman, refused to give up. She studied Gary carefully. She watched his habits. When he trusted her more, she pretended to care for him, even helped him with chores. And slowly he started to believe her loyalty. Heartbeat sound effect. Then came the night. March 24, 1987. It was freezing cold and the wind screamed through the streets. Gary took Josefina upstairs and left the other women chained in the basement. He believed Josefina was fully on his side now. He even took her out of the house, to run errands. But Josefina knew this was her only chance. When Gary stopped at a gas station she slipped away. She ran through the icy streets, barefoot, with metal chains still clanging around her ankles. Sound of her running, gasping for breath. She reached a police station and told them everything. At first they hesitated. Her story sounded too impossible to believe. But when officers followed her back to the house, they saw the truth. The stench hit them before they even reached the basement. When they opened the door, silence. Then faint crying. 2 women chained to the wall, barely alive. In the corner, a pit covered with a wooden board. And inside it, more horrors. Music swells. Police radio chatter fades in. They found bones, human remains, and tools of torture. Gary Heidnik was arrested on the spot. His basement was sealed off, the house surrounded by officers. When the story broke, the city erupted in shock. People couldn't believe it, that this man, this quiet neighbor, had done all that. Newspapers called him the House of Horrors Killer. But locals came up with a different name. The Tornado Killer. Because just like a tornado, Gary Heidnik destroyed everything in his path. Quietly, suddenly, and completely. Thunder crash. Camera pans up to dark sky. His trial would reveal even darker details, things too disturbing to describe. But even before that, everyone knew one thing. They had stopped one of the most terrifying killers in American history. Still, many questions remained. How did he keep 6 women in his house without anyone noticing? Why did the police ignore earlier complaints about screams and smells? And how many more victims could there have been before he was finally caught? Music slows to eerie silence. The answers would come later, in Chapter 2. But for now, Philadelphia could finally breathe again. The storm was over. Or at least they thought it was. Fade to black. Low thunder in the distance. Text on screen. Gary M. Heidnik was arrested March 25, 1987. He was executed by lethal injection on July 6, 1999. 6 known victims, and a lifetime of unanswered questions. Thunder rolls one last time. End of Chapter 1. Soft static hum. Camera pans across black and white police photos, mugshots, and the remains of a demolished house. Narrator low tone. March 1987. The storm on North Marshall Street had finally ended. Gary Heidnik, the so-called tornado killer, was in custody. But for investigators, the calm that followed felt just as disturbing. Because even after they pulled 6 women from his basement and gathered the evidence, questions began to rise. Questions that would never be fully answered. Sound, paper rustling, distant thunder. Narrator. When police searched Heidnik's home, they found diaries, ledgers, and audio tapes, detailed records of everything he had done. He had written the women's names, dates, punishments, and even his own twisted plans for breeding. Heidnik said he wanted to create a family, not through love or care but through control and pain. He believed he was chosen by God to repopulate the earth with his own bloodline. It sounded like madness. But behind that madness was something scarier: intelligence. Every move, every kidnapping, every word, planned, cold, methodical. Cut to slow montage of crime scene photos, shadows, and courtroom sketches. After his arrest, the trial revealed the unthinkable. The basement pit was only part of the story. Police also discovered human remains in the freezer, and traces of flesh ground up in the garbage disposal. When questioned, Heidnik simply said he disposed of things efficiently. Brief pause. Clock ticking. The courtroom fell silent when survivors testified. Their voices shook as they described months of terror, the chains, the starvation, the electric shocks. Josefina Rivera, the woman who escaped and saved them all, told the world exactly what happened in that basement. She was calm, but every word she said painted a picture no one could forget. Faint sound of a heartbeat in background. The jury found Heidnik guilty on all counts: kidnapping, torture, and murder. He was sentenced to death. And 12 years later, on July 6, 1999, Gary Heidnik was executed by lethal injection. But the end of his life wasn't the end of his story. Wind sweeps through, echoing sound of chains rattling faintly. Narrator. In the years that followed, rumors began to swirl. Because the official record listed 6 victims. But many investigators believed the real number could be higher. Neighbors recalled seeing unfamiliar women around Heidnik's house long before the first confirmed abduction. Some said they heard screams months earlier, but police never followed up. Others swore they saw Gary digging behind his home at night. When police searched the yard, they found bones. But not all of them could be identified. Some were too old, some incomplete, and some didn't match the known victims. Eerie instrumental starts, slow, low piano. To this day, there's no official count of how many people Gary Heidnik actually killed. And that's what haunts investigators most. Because Gary was smart enough to hide evidence, to manipulate people, and to convince the system he wasn't dangerous. For years, before his crimes were exposed, he had been institutionalized several times. Psychiatrists called him delusional, unstable, and dangerous. Yet each time he talked his way out, claiming he was fine, calm, in control. He even founded his own fake church, the United Church of the Ministers of God. He collected money, held fake sermons, and even opened bank accounts under the church's name. By the time police caught him, his church account had more than $500,000. Thunder rumble, fade to rain sound. So how did this man, clearly unstable, clearly violent, live freely for so long? Was it failure by the system, or just the terrifying truth that no one was watching? Some experts say Heidnik's crimes could have been prevented. He was reported to authorities multiple times. Neighbors complained about noises and smells. Even one of his ex-partners had warned social services. But nothing happened. Every warning, ignored. Low tone, pause. And that might be the most chilling part. It wasn't that Heidnik was invisible. It's that no one believed what they were seeing. Camera pans over the empty lot where the house once stood. After the trial, the city tore down Heidnik's house. The basement was filled, the walls destroyed, the ground sealed. But locals say something still lingers there. They say when the wind blows just right at night, you can hear faint sounds, a chain dragging across concrete, a voice whispering for help, a creak, like the basement door opening again. Of course, no one knows if it's real, or if it's just the city's memory refusing to forget. Soft piano returns. But the truth is darker than any ghost story. Because Gary Heidnik proved something terrifying about human nature. That real monsters don't come from the dark. They live among us. They look normal. They smile. They go to work. And inside, they hide a storm waiting to break. Thunder strikes. Fade to black. Text on screen. Gary M. Heidnik, executed July 6, 1999. 6 confirmed victims. Possible others still unidentified. The full truth died with him. Wind fades slowly into silence. Narrator quietly. The tornado killer is gone. But the questions he left behind still echo in the dark. Thunder crash. End of chapter 2.